Right. I'm told that the time is 6 o'clock on July 19th, 2017, and I'd like to call to order the City of Santa Barbara Airport Commission meeting. And this begins with the roll call.
Karen Kahn,
Present.
Kirk Martin,
Present.
Craig Arcuri, Carl Hopkins, Dolores Johnson, Bruce Miller,
Here.
Jim Wilson.
Here.
And do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, no.
This is the public comment section. This is the time that any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission and that is not scheduled before them that same day. The total amount of time for the public comment is 15 minutes, and no individual speaker may speak for more than 2 minutes. And I have one speaker slip from George, and I won't try to pronounce your last name.
Yes, George, if you like.
Okay, George?
Okay, thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, everybody. My name is George Sekilariev, and I'm here to speak on behalf of on-demand cab drivers. A few days ago, Abby emailed you our letter explaining the severity of the situation we are in. In our letter, we gave facts and examples explaining why many of these issues are so important to us. And some of these issues have the potential to bring back a severely hostile environment for the on-demand cab drivers. Like we had about 5 years ago, in which we solicited the help of Congresswoman Louise Capps, who quickly put an end to it. What actually happened, she called the mayor, we suspect, who called the airport administrator, and the very next day the security guys came and asked her, "What did you do, guys? We were told to leave you alone." So that's what happened. But we were happy, and everybody was happy. And the main thing was hostility vanished, and we went back to business. So this is a little story, but in a nutshell, we appeal to you to stop these rules from going to the Santa Barbara City Council. The date might be next Tuesday, 25th, so time is of essence. So we appeal to you to stop these new rules, and until we have had a chance to spend maybe an hour or hour and a half with you to discuss these rules. You appear to be reasonable people, and you proved it by wanting to help us stay in business. Sustainability was the term I heard you use in your last meeting, and I'm personally very grateful, and so are my cab driver friends, that you felt that way. And that's exactly the kind of attitude that help we are appealing for tonight. And my 2 minutes are up, I suppose, so if you have any questions, I'd appreciate the time.
Thank you for a well-timed presentation.
Okay, thank you. Have a productive evening.
Do we have any other speaker slips?
No other speaker slips for
All right.
public comment.
Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. And do I hear a motion regarding the consent calendar?
Make motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The consent calendar is waived. And moving on to the notices, that on Thursday, July 13th at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted the agenda on the bulletin board of the Airport Administration. Which brings us to liaison reports. That will, Commissioner Martin reminds me that we have agreed to the consent calendar being we've waived the reading of the minutes, and we have approved.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Okay, we have waived the reading of the minutes. And the property management report was also, as I understand, waived.
Part of the
Okay.
consent calendar.
That was accepted as part of the consent calendar.
Yes.
Okay?
We waived the reading and accepted the minutes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Accepted the-
Liaison reports. Santa Barbara Liaison Council Member Frank Hotchkiss. It's okay. Doesn't matter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we had to trim our budget by about 1%, and we did that. Always painful, it's like tightening your belt, so that was done successfully. Most interesting thing we did recently was to approve what's called the oversized vehicle. It's not a ban, but it's a restriction. And I think erroneously, well, for sure erroneously, but people started to think because they had these big vans, I can't drive in Santa Barbara anymore. That's not the case, fortunately. But it did include some so-called sprinter van types. And what the restriction is, because of reasons of safety and visibility and seeing around them, if you're coming out of a driveway or you're parked behind them, not supposed to park on city streets. Elsewhere you can park. So at first that sounds really onerous, but still Vaughn's, Ralph's, TJ's if you can get in, other places like that. And there are some lots downtown where you can also be. But that it has to be posted, so signs have gone up pretty much around the city and will go into effect in enforcement-wise on the 1st of September. And that's about all I got right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that brings us to City of Goleta Liaison Councilmember Michael T. Bennett.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I would just like to bring to your attention, it's kind of already started, but it's going to get pretty intense here. We're in the process of paving many of our streets that are in absolute terrible condition. And we're going to be also slurring those that are in decent condition. All in all, we're going to spend about $5 million in this effort. So there's going to be a great deal of activity for the next 3 months, which is going to affect people because lanes will be reduced as all this process goes on. I think we're pretty familiar with what happens when those things occur, but it's going to also have some impacts potentially for people that are trying to get to the airport, because often we're all in a big rush and we don't anticipate that we're going to have to stand behind a flag man or woman or whatever and eat up our time. So I thought I would at least pass that on so that airport patrons would know that their time coming to the airport for the next few months at least could very well be impacted. And again, as I say, I thought you should know that. Thank you.
That might even be something that could go on the website, just notifying people that there is paving and to add a little extra time.
Certainly, and we'll contact City Hall and maybe get a list of streets so we can post that for sure. Thanks, Councilman Bennett. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to item 5, the subject implementation of the airport master plan fixed base operator redevelopment process, and the recommendation that we receive a staff presentation regarding the implementation.
Yes, indeed. Commission Chair Deanna Zackerson will do the presentation on our proposed process for the RFP for FBOs. This is the first step in the implementation of our master plan. Deanna?
All righty. Good evening, Commissioners. As Hazel said, this is the time for us to talk about the plans to compete our fixed base operator business, and just intended to give you a little bit of an overview as we begin to take some of those steps in that process. First of all, I'm sure that you are all well aware of what a fixed base operator does, but it is one of those industry terms that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. It's one of those terms that's been around for a long, long time. And essentially, it is obviously an operator of flight activity in a fixed location, as opposed to early in the age of aviation when a lot of that was very transient. A fixed base operator today is a private company that has been granted the rights to operate at a publicly owned facility, a publicly owned airport. Fixed base operators at most airports provide essential services. Airports really couldn't get by without them. And particularly the general aviation community is served by FBOs. Fueling is an important component, as I think we all know, also for the commercial airlines that serve this airport. And like every other activity at an airport, the operations of an FBO are regulated by the airport and, of course, the FAA. So a little bit of history of FBOs at Santa Barbara, which shares a typical history, actually, of FBOs at many other airports, in that we've had a lot of stability here. We've had two companies that have operated here for quite some time. Signature Flight Support and Atlantic Aviation have both been here since the early 80s operating, and they operate out of a total of 32 acres of leased space. Signature has roughly twice as much leased space as Atlantic, and I'll be able to show you that on a map here shortly. But each of these companies operates terminal buildings, hangars, conducts maintenance on aircraft, and obviously provides fuel and has their own fueling farms here. And here's what our two current FBOs look like. Great facilities here, actually. And here's where they are located. So in the upper portion of the slide, the two boxes closest to Hollister Avenue, that is the Signature area. And then down at the bottom of the slide, in the southern portion of the airfield, is Atlantic. So as you can see, even from this slide, the Signature premises is quite a bit bigger than Atlantic. And I believe even that Atlantic lost some portion of its premises when the new terminal was built. So the FBO business is one of those legs that, from a financial standpoint, the airport stands on, and it's an important leg, particularly as the ebbs and flows of commercial aviation have gone through the years. The FBO business, along with our commercial and industrial properties, is a really important part. And it represents here in fiscal year 16 about 13% of our overall airport revenues. And that revenue comes from ground and building rent from the operators, landing fees, and then fees on their fuel flowage. So this is a slide from the master plan, which has been talked about quite a bit and is really at a juncture where we believe it's going to be moving forward. It's going to Planning Commission, I believe, in August. Is that right? And here you see the important component to the FBO business, and that is that relocating these two footprints to the north side of the main runway, closest to Hollister. Both of the premises would be, despite the fact that the shapes look a little bit different, they actually are exactly the same size, of 23 acres. The reason for the relocation of both of the FBOs is, of course, tied to the master plan for safety reasons, obviously, consolidating all of the FBO traffic north of the main runway. And it also enables us to potentially use the property that is on the southern portion, currently occupied by Atlantic, in the event that we need to expand the terminal facility or need to expand the parking facility. And that's potentially something that could be coming sooner rather than later. So a little bit on the industry outlook for the FBO business. There's been a lot of consolidation in the business since the recession. There are a few larger international companies, really, providing FBO services. And of course, there's some smaller regional and even state-based FBO businesses. So, but generally, the business has been consolidating. There's been a look at diversifying services beyond just fueling, because fueling obviously has its sensitivities to it. And of course, even as the businesses have been consolidating and airports have increasingly gone to competing these businesses, as I mentioned before, both of the operators here at Santa Barbara have been here since the 80s, and really that's a trend. You're seeing many places that these opportunities are being competed primarily for the purpose of airports improving their revenue streams from them. And certainly in our case, the reason for competing the FBO business, besides obviously the development that needs to take place as part of the master plan, is to improve the revenues from it. It's certainly not a reflection of the performance of the current operators in any way. We have great operators here in Santa Barbara. As it is with most opportunities in airports, there are more people vying for opportunities in airports than there are airport opportunities available. So we fully anticipate that there is going to be quite a bit of competition for these opportunities, which is a good thing for the airport. It's a good thing for Santa Barbara. So the plan is that we will compete these businesses using a very industry typical request for proposals process. And it will be a quite extensive and thoughtful process. It will take some time to do, but obviously the outcome of it is quite important to the airport, so it's important that we do it right. And of the objectives for doing this RFP, for competing it, is to improve the financial return, as I mentioned before. But then also, of course, we are maximizing limited space on the airfield, as you saw with the master plan schematic and the map. Some of the facilities that we have here, particularly hangar facilities, are quite aged, and so there is obviously an opportunity for some new investment in the facility. The customer service experience is a great one already, but there's always opportunities as technology advances and things like that. Customers have different needs, and here's a chance to meet some of those needs. And also, what better way to get input on how to phase the redevelopment, because obviously running an airport, you're always considering how you improve things while you're in operation. So it's sort of like trying to remodel your kitchen during Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, it's a difficult thing. So this is a great way for us to get information from the folks who know the business the best on how to best phase the redevelopment without impacting the business. So we have some important considerations as we head into this process. First of all, both of the current FBO agreements expire next year in May. From our standpoint, that's not actually a good thing that they're both expiring so soon and at the same time. So I think there is a recognition that we are going to need to keep those operators in operation, which inevitably will mean a form of either newly negotiated lease agreement or holdover for some period of time. Stakeholder involvement in this process is very, very important. We get the best product out of it. The more we know, the better it is. And that includes looking at the market. What does the market want today? I mean, it's obviously been many, many years since the business has been revitalized here in Santa Barbara, so there's lots of opportunities to do that. A really important consideration for us, and this goes back to competition and the stiff competition for these opportunities, is that the process really needs to be run transparently. It needs to be run in a very methodical way, so that at the end of the day, obviously there will be more losers than winners, but we want to be able to instill confidence that the process was conducted properly and it was conducted fairly. And so we need to take every step to avoid any sort of reason for someone to protest the outcome. And also the collaboration with the City of Goleta is something that is going to be a big focus of the airport. Obviously, our success depends upon it. So that'll be a big piece of as we move forward with the redevelopment. So the next step, however, before we get to that RFP, is really to engage some expertise to assist us. And we hope at the end of this week, we will be issuing a request for qualifications for a third-party consultant specialized in FBO development to assist us with creating the basis for the RFP itself helping us manage the process all the way through to lease negotiation. They'll be key to developing like the documents, as I said, and key to really completing that market analysis that we talked to. And the site redevelopment piece is also key. I think as we've talked about a number of times at this point in time, we essentially have blobs on a map, and we need to obviously have a great deal more definition to what those facilities are going to look like. And that is the end of my presentation, but I am happy to take any comments or questions, certainly. It's going to be a long process, but one that I think is going to be very rewarding for us in the long run.
Do we have any comments, questions?
I was curious if you've developed a budgetary figure for the consultation for developing the RFP.
So the consultant RFQ, well, because it is a request for qualifications, that's part of what we will learn. They will not be proposing it as a project. They'll be proposing it as a time and materials type of a contract. However, as part of the RFQ, we do have in there a sort of a non-binding request for a magnitude based. It's a fairly well-developed scope of work in the RFQ. So an order of magnitude cost that they believe it may amount to, nothing that they would be scored upon necessarily, but would be information for us, of course.
Okay, thank you.
This really is going to concentrate on just awarding the contract for the FBO and not for the development and the movement of the facilities into new spaces on the airport.
Well, really what takes place is, as part of the redevelopment, the redevelopment really is in large part conducted by the companies that are ultimately successful, because they will be making a substantial investment in new facilities. I mean, it's dovetailed with the airport and some of the things that we need to do to make that possible, inevitably, but the investment and how the configuration ultimately looks like on those pieces of property is going to be up to the future operators. And they're likely to be long-term agreements. I mean, standard for the industry these days appears to be somewhere around 30 years, just because of the magnitude of investment involved.
So the contract with the FBOs would include the efforts to move on the airport.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
If we have no other questions from the commission, I do have one request to speak. Steve Hirschfeld?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Steve Hirschfeld. I'm a Regional Vice President for the West Coast for Atlantic Aviation, and I'm lucky enough to work with Bree every day here that runs our facility here. You know, as a stakeholder, we're looking forward to being part of this process in the future, in this design cache, I think it's called. I had to look that up in the dictionary. I wasn't sure what that was. Charrette. Yeah, I still don't have it. But, you know, I think we can bring a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge to this FBO planning and process. So, you know, and just over the last 2 months as Atlantic in our network, we've completed about $60 million worth of projects. We got about 40 more that will close out in the next 6 to 8 months. So we know what the industry needs today. We're spending money, and we're looking forward to this process. So, and again, and looking forward to working with the airport and the consultant. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll just add, I'm not sure it pointed it out here, but we did have a subcommittee meeting of the General Aviation group
The lease
review group, and had a fairly detailed presentation, and we had quite a bit of participation there already from the FBOs. And certainly one of our interest is ensuring that we're able to leverage the expertise of the existing FBOs as well as other stakeholders in the process.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to item 6, the Airport Industrial Area Specific Plan SP6 update.
Yes, Madam Chair. As you know, and Andrew Vermont will do the presentation tonight, the airport adopted SP6 back in 1998, I believe. And many things have happened on the industrial commercial property of the airport. And so staff feels it's an appropriate time to do an update of that plan along with a fresh EIR. So, Andrew, thank you.
Madam Chair and Airport Commission, Hazel just gave the short version of what I'm about to tell you, so I'll just get right into it. I'll give a little bit of background on the Airport Industrial Specific Plan, some of the considerations that lead to why the specific plan ought to be updated, what the environmental review process is for something like of that nature, what our immediate next steps are, and then there's a staff recommendation for action for the Airport Commission. So this is the diagram of the SP6, I'm going to try to call it the specific plan, of the specific plan area. It's the north side of the airfield as well as all of the industrial sites north of Hollister in the city of Santa
Let me
Barbara.
turn these lights.
And it was designed to separate the commercial industrial operations at the airport from the airfield itself when we were going through the aviation facilities plan and the runway safety area projects. But it now will overlap substantially with about 100 acres of the 225 acres of the specific plan are in what would be the airport master plan planning area. So that needs to be adjusted. The purpose of the plan in 1998 was to assist in the revenue generation to keep the airport self-sustaining and to improve existing and add new commercial, industrial, and aviation related space through the year 2010, which was the distant future, of course, at the time. This is the illustration of what 2010 might look like, and it includes a few things that are a little out of step with existing condition today. Those include a multiplex theater. What else do we have? Oh, an expansion of the golf course, and of course the parcel known as Parcel 22, 6100 Hollister was envisioned to be a series of light industrial buildings. Instead, we have a smaller series that's in plan check right now, but we have direct relief is of course missing from this plan as well. Oh, and we also have a big open yard usage thing that does not include the QTA, the rental car quick turn facility. So let's take a look at the changing setting. In 1997, which is when the environmental review was conducted, we had a forecast of what 2010 would look like, and then I also have what 2016, our last full year, looked like. In employments per year in GA operations, we were expecting pretty bullish growth over that 15-20 year period. Instead, we've had modest growth in employments per year, only about 50,000, and we've had a huge decrease in the number of GA operations. About half of what was in 1997 was last year. So that relates a little bit further down to, I've taken as an example one of our favorite intersections, Hollister and Fairview Avenues. It's actually functioning at a higher level of service today than it was in 1997, and I think that's in part attributable to decreased operations at the airport, as well as changing commuting habits. There are actually slightly more people who are biking, carpooling, and taking the bus than in the 90s. I put build out in quotations here because, again, this isn't very similar to what was in the plan. We did have a Chrysler dealership that was demolished, and so the proposed auto dealership is a similar use and in a similar location, but not the same thing. And also with Parcel 22, with direct relief and 6100 Hollister underway, the big push for implementing this plan is completed, I suppose, or completed in a manner of speaking. But this leaves us with about 132,000 square feet that was allocated for development in this specific plan that doesn't have an identified use. And so the airport needs to, or really the city as a whole, needs to consider whether to come up with a new development for that floor area allocation, to relinquish it so that it can be used in another part of the city or perhaps not constructed at all, or to transfer it to the airfield if there's a substantial development south of Hollister Avenue. Also important in the specific plan was the development of the architectural and urban sign guidelines for the airport. They have been added to by a number of other regulations and guidelines for design and development, as well as an interest both by HLC and ABR in seeing a pattern of development that is consistent with the surrounding Goleta uses, that we really have a hard time identifying what the character of the north side of the airport really should be. We have a number of sources telling us what they should be, but we need to consolidate those and come up with a single guideline for, so that someone wants to develop a lease parcel, they know what on earth they're trying to do, whether it's Spanish colonial revival or something more modern. Also, our zoning ordinance is a prescriptive zoning ordinance, so it describes allowable uses. It's principally describing uses that were present in 1997 or 1998. So as uses have changed and as focus at the airport has been toward industrial uses and away from commercial uses, with commercial demand being in decline and industrial space being at a premium in Santa Barbara, we need to look at redefining the allowable uses in these zones and maybe adjusting some zone boundaries. So we could either take an example from industrial use zones in the city proper, or we could take our existing ordinance and just make some minor updates, or we could, I included form-based code as well as an option. That's maybe a little outside the box, but there's a lot to consider there. So of course, anything that we do involves environmental review in California, and this specific plan was updated or was reviewed in 1997 in an environmental impact times through addenda and supplemental EIRs for various projects that either were or were not completed, and the environmental record for the specific plan is now very complicated, especially with respect to the issue areas that were most commonly updated, which were air quality and traffic. It is very difficult to interpret, even for professionals, what is what the existing condition is, what the future condition will be, as we're looking at different traffic thresholds and different baselines over the course of a couple decades there. So an update to the specific plan would require its own EIR almost certainly. We would need to revise the existing setting, basically write an existing setting for 2017 or 2018, and revise a project description that may include a reduced scope from what this specific plan originally held. There are also a number of issue areas in CEQA that did not exist 20 years ago that need to be incorporated in a modern environmental impact analysis, such as greenhouse gas emissions, energy audit, vehicle miles traveled, and sea level rise adaptation. We also need to come up with a new suite of alternatives to consider, and we have to define a preferred plan, and then we have to come up with other plans that could also be done and identify an environmentally preferred alternative. And then you identify all your impacts and you propose mitigation to address those impacts. So our next steps would be to, again, just as the previous item, solicit consultants through a request for qualifications. I expect that we would receive those qualifications toward the end of August. We'll have about a four-week solicitation period. And then through fall, we would select a consultant, negotiate a contract, take the contract to City Council for award. And then, once we've got someone under contract, it'll be at least a year to 18-month planning process. And so staff's recommendation for this item is that Airport Commission recommend to City Council initiation of a specific plan update.
I do have a question. How does this EIR relate to the EIR for the master plan for the airport?
Well, it would be its own environmental impact analysis. The scope of the master plan EIR did not include the areas north of Hollister. It was specifically an airfield-oriented
plan. So it covers a
plan.
separate geographical area.
That's right. So we would basically be using Hollister Avenue as the boundary between this effort and the master plan effort.
Thank you.
Well, certainly planning for such a key segment of the airport is important. We're being asked to recommend to City Council that we proceed with the revision like the RFQ process for previous project. I'm wondering Will there be then, well, I'm presuming you'll have some budgetary numbers for this. Clearly, it's not as big as the master plan, but a year to a year and a half's worth of work on a plan is certainly going to have significant costs. So when those numbers are developed, will this then come back around for another recommendation to proceed with developing the plan or the revision of the plan itself? It would seem that it would have fairly significant budgetary impact.
Commissioner Khan and Commissioner Miller, at this point, I don't know what the cost is going to be. So yes, once we have the proposals back in and have a recommendation for that, we can certainly bring it back for consultation with Airport Commission. And at the same time, we would identify a funding source for that project. I feel that at this time, it's really important for the airport to update, especially since we have the conflict between the master plan space and the specific plan. We need to make amendments to it one way or the other, just to get sub-area 1 out of the airfield side. But we certainly will bring it back and keep you posted along the way, as well as City Council, since they would have to approve the contract.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Questions? Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion that we recommend City Council to proceed with the revision of the plan.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries, which brings us to the director's report.
Just a couple of items tonight. We are continuing on our roll here with increased passenger traffic. As you noticed in your packet, last month we were up 6% that month over the prior month, and year-to-date we're up 10.7%. You'll notice that Alaska is down about 16%, but keep in mind that last year we had 2 jets to Seattle and 1 to Portland, and this year we don't. We just have the 1 to Seattle until August 27, I think, when they will change out that aircraft to a 737. So they couldn't give us 2 planes, but they could give us 1 big one. And we said, thank you very much. And so that will start as well. We still have, just as a reminder, we have mainline service to San Francisco, mainline service to Denver, and to Dallas. So with this one, we'll have 4 mainline aircraft on the field and have not had that for decades. So we're really pleased with the progress and the seat capacity increase. Even though operations aren't increasing, the seat capacity is growing, and that's important for the community and the region for sure. Also wanted to mention the master plan, as Deanna mentioned earlier. The EIR for the aviation or the airport master plan will go to Planning Commission for their consideration on August 10 at 1 p.m. And it will be held in City Council chambers, and if you're available and would like to attend, certainly that would be an appropriate time for you to participate. The airfield electrical and safety and fence project is complete. We're filing the final paperwork with the FAA on that particular project. Runway 725 overlay and reconstruction has been delayed because, as I think I reported before, the cost of that project came in over what our federal grants were for that we had on hand. We're hoping to get discretionary funds. FAA has asked us to hold the bid, and Granite, who was the bidder, successful bidder, has agreed to that until mid-August, until we can see if we can get discretionary. If we don't get discretionary funding, then we will reject the bid, wait until next summer when we get our next entitlement, so then we would have enough money, and then we'd rebid the project at that time. Hopefully we'll get discretionary. 6100 Hollister, our small light industrial development project, is in the building department plan check. We're responding to their comments and hope to have that out to bid next month, I believe. That's what I understand. The solar project, the contractor with the PPA, the power purchase agreement, met recently with airport staff and received an overview of the steps necessary to get a coastal development permit, go through ABR, and get city building permits for that project. So they're underway doing that, and hopefully we'll have something that we can report back as far as the design and layout later this fall. Financial summary next. Tom Bullers has been out on family leave. He and his wife had a little baby boy on June 24th, I think it was. So he will be back next week, and we'll schedule a financial report for Airport Commission upon his return. With that, unless you have questions, that's the end of my report.
I was curious if there was any progress on the taxiway hotel extension plan.
We do have negotiations underway with the selected firm, Kimberly Horn. And Owen Thomas is in charge of that. He's on vacation, but I know that he is working on a preliminary scope for that taxiway extension project, and plans to have that back to, I think it's in September. He was talking about having it so we can do a report in September for Airport Commission.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? I think that brings us to the end, and we are adjourned.
Very good. Thank you all.
Mhm.